you here at an official ECOSOC Partnership Forum side event. My name is Darian Stibbe, and I am the director of the Partnering Initiative, one of the partners behind this side event, along with our colleagues Wings and UN DESA, who are our partners in the Partnership Accelerator. And we have the great pleasure of today exploring the power of real people-centric public-private philanthropy partnerships to deliver systemic or transformational change. So we know how, by bringing together the resources of public and private and people, bringing together the regulation shifts, the taxation, the public services and public system, alongside the private, whether that's the real factories on the ground or the agriculture or the investments to be made or the products and services, with the people, the voice of the people, the power of the people to ensure that whatever is done is just and fair, the technical support from NGOs, from the UN system. We know that collectively partnerships can bring together different levers that can adjust and change the system. And the role of philanthropy within that is immeasurable, is really extremely important. Philanthropy has an incredibly important catalytic role to really help to get these public-private people partnerships up and running, to support their continued development, and then to allow them to become institutionalized or commercialized, or in some way become sort of sustainable in the future. And today we are going to be looking at how these public-private philanthropy partnerships work by diving into one specific partnership, the Regenerative Production Landscape Collaborative, initiated by Laudes Foundation with partners including GIZ, who will be here speaking today. And this partnership is really about tackling the challenge of the apparent competition between environment and people and commerce. And it is really around how can we foster agricultural ecosystems that conserve and enhance natural resources while actually improving farmer incomes, farmer livelihoods, and providing the goods, the products for international supply chains by business that is wanting far more sustainable crops, etc. And we will have, I'm delighted to say, we'll have a panel which will include people on the ground, colleagues from the farmer associations, to really sort of reflect on this partnership, to be able to then sort of begin to draw out some of the lessons from that. And we have a colleague also from Sattva Consulting who has done a lot of work on multi-stakeholder partnerships, particularly in India. So we'll widen out a little bit, sort of more generally around the use of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And then myself and my colleague Eva Race from Wings will then be sort of draw out some lessons then for sort of the global context. So I'd like to just ask Eva to introduce herself and perhaps introduce Wings, which is a network of philanthropy support organizations from around the world. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Darian, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining this conversation and to the Partnering Initiative for organizing it. Yeah, as Darian says, I'm in some ways here to represent one of the P's in the 4 P's, which is the philanthropy and the role of philanthropy in these partnerships. As Darian says, Wings is a global network of organizations that are working to grow and strengthen philanthropy. We have over 200 members across 65 countries. And it's not just this global reach that we represent, but also the diversity of what philanthropy means, right? So everything from local giving initiatives to the big global philanthropies, to academic organizations that research philanthropy. So that's really what makes up the network that is Wings. And so as part of that, we're really interested in working with philanthropy to position itself as an actor in systems change and the kind of change that we'll hear about today, and what it means to be a partner in these multi-stakeholder partnerships. So we're working with the Partnering Initiative, who are a member of Wings. We've also commissioned a number of regional studies into the kind of ecosystem that is needed for philanthropy to actively engage in these partnerships, including one with Sattva, which we'll be hearing a little bit about. in Asia. So really excited to hear the contributions today, and then join back for some reflections of what I've been hearing about the role of philanthropy here. So yes, thanks again for organizing this, and back to you, Darren.
Thanks so much, Eva. It's always a pleasure working with our partners, Wings. Just before we start, can I ask again, anyone who joined a little bit later, can you just put your organization name alongside your name? Just if you right-click your image, then you can then choose to rename yourself to then include your organizational name as well. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Tom Harrison, who is then sort of going to introduce the next section, really diving into this partnership, the RPLC. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Darian. So RPLC, which you'll hear about in 2 countries, is actually in 4 countries. So you'll hear from speakers who are in Tanzania and India. There are also variations of the same model in Pakistan and Brazil. Our first speaker, Hendrik Berman from GIZ Tanzania, will explain what RPLC is and give us a flavor of some of the main themes of this partnership. And then we will have a panel between Hendrik and an implementing partner from India to go into more depth on this case study. So I think I'll hand over straight to Hendrik, ask him to introduce himself and talk us through the RPLC model. Thanks, Hendrik.
Thank you very much, Tom. And yeah, hello to everyone. Good afternoon from Tanzania. It's actually afternoon here. So I'll have to run you through the RPLC model. It's when you talk about multi-stakeholder partnerships and landscape models, it's always quite complex, but obviously we have limited time. So I'm talking about the specific RPLC, Regenerative Production Landscape Collaborative in Tanzania. We gave it a Swahili name, Kijani Hai, which means green alive in Swahili. But what it basically is trying to put together a ecosystem, an agricultural production ecosystem that basically brings together these competing interests that makes agricultural production sustainable, conserving natural resources, and making people benefit of it, and the private sector in it as well. In our case, this is, like all the RPLCs, funded by Laudes Foundation, and we're implementing as a consortium of GIZ and Helvetas together. Next slide, please. So to quickly talk about the issue that we're trying to tackle. So we're working in 2 regions in Tanzania and Singida, quiet regions, semi-arid cotton growing areas in Tanzania. And the issue we see there is a very widespread degradation of the landscape, coming from unsustainable agricultural practices. So you have farmers that basically do not know how to take care of their soil, and whenever the soil is depleted, expand the agriculture area into more natural land. Huge problems of deforestation, of overgrazing by livestock. There are nomadic livestock herders roaming around, so a resource conflict basically, resulting soil erosion, huge loss of biodiversity, and in general, just a decrease in the natural productivity of the land. So it's something that then basically stems from problems in environmental issues that have then impacts on livelihoods and basically future purpose and hope of people. Next slide, please. So the RPLC model is something that tries to now tackle this at different levels. So basically, the idea is it's always a collective of stakeholders that works together. That come to the stakeholders later, but put together this agricultural production ecosystem that, on the one hand, conserves natural resources by promoting regenerative farming methods, and agricultural production that does not deplete resources but regenerate, that builds community resilience. So basically supporting local communities by, on the one hand, improving their economic livelihoods, stability, resilience to climate, which is a very big issue, as you can imagine, in semi-arid regions, and but also participation in governance, basically, and issues like land management and being responsible for the management of their own land and their own resources. And then the integration of the private sector by enabling private sector at all levels, so local agribusinesses processes up to, in our case, we come from a history of organic cotton, basically into the textile, the international textile value chain. Next slide, please. So where did all of this start? We were so lucky, you know, when you try to put something like this together, it's quite complex. We were so lucky that we had a history of 6 years of implement a typical value chain development program, an organic cotton program in Tanzania, and within that already piloted kind of landscape elements of an integrated landscape management program. So we have private sector players, cotton ginners and other aggregators that provide extension services to smallholder farmers. Now have around 70,000 smallholder farmers that are practicing regenerative agriculture and are certified. We've worked with communities. In Tanzania, there's a local governance element that's called village environmental committees that really have quite a lot of decision power at their level, and facilitated basically coming up with regulations and bylaws at their level, looking to include other NGOs working in the landscape. And then at the district level, we supported districts in drafting district environmental action plans. So really kind of plans that try to see what are the issues in the environmental issues and how can we invest in and benefit from ecosystem restoration. And then going up to the national level, where Tanzania adopted its national ecological organic agriculture strategy and is quite supportive and supporting industry associations at national level around that. So this is a bit where we're coming from, and now I want to quickly show the kind of strategic element of what is a this multi-stakeholder partnership behind it. Next slide, please. So there you see all the different stakeholders, from producers, we call them producers, smallholder farmers or people in communities, the farming communities themselves, the local government, obviously the national government is also a stakeholder, but if we look at the direct collective in the landscape, the private sector, civil society, and ultimately also different kinds of investors and financiers. And this is where this RPLC approach comes in. And what I showed before was a good kind of starting point to now lift it to the strategic level. And the strategic level really is to, with all stakeholders together, develop a common vision for the landscape, for the regeneration of the landscape, and for creating ultimately business cases and win-win situations between all these stakeholders. So only by smallholder farmers practicing a sustainable type of agriculture that also brings high yields now and in the future, only then can the private sector actually aggregate and benefit from it. Then local government has more resources in terms of, for example, tax payments, and then investment cases are basically being created that attract financing. So it's, I think, really this strategic aspect of it that is the core element of RPLC. Next slide, or next, there's a small thing coming into it. It's basically the facilitation of, we call it a landscape compact. There are different terminologies for it. So kind of a plan and a roadmap, a 20-year vision to how do we restore a landscape and what actually do we have from it, and a 5-year very implementable, action-oriented roadmap where every of these players basically says how they contribute. And a very important element is common KPIs, common key performance indicators. What do we want to achieve? So I said we have 70,000 smallholder farmers. We want in 5-10 years to grow that to 150,000 smallholder farmers. What is the amount of sustainably certified, or not certified, but sustainably produced agro commodities? How much do we want to grow that? What are the value chains that we can strengthen? What is then the possible tax income that can then be put back into ecosystem restoration? How many hectares or square kilometers of land do we want to restore? Who is doing that? The local government, but also other civil society actors that play into it. And then another key element of that is the M&E, because I always say without M&E, nothing really has happened because you don't know. So basically this landscape level M&E or MRV framework, depending on how far you are. And I think maybe that as a last part of how now this philanthropy part comes in here. This whole collective would basically, at least in our case, not happen as such without the role that we played already in the beginning through this value chain development program, but then lifting it at this level and basically creating this landscape compact, and also with data and M&E show there are sustainable business cases. So we can show smallholder farmers are benefiting from this type of production model. The private sector is benefiting from it. Local communities are benefiting from it. The government is benefiting from it. And therefore really create this type of awareness and then signing up to this common vision. And we're currently talking to a number of landscape investors that are finally seeing how this all fits together, how there is a vision, and that attracts capital basically. And there we're talking different types of capital into ecosystem restoration, but also a clear commercial debt and equity investments into the private sector, but always with a focus on reinforcing this, this kind of, I call it ecosystem restoration business model. And yeah, without philanthropy and without that type of grant funding that kickstarts all of this, it would certainly not happen in that way. I hope that was not too long.
Thank you, Hendrik. That was perfect. And now we have a chance to go into a bit more depth as well. So I'd like to introduce now my second panel member, KK Trivedi, from the organization ASHA in India. So KK, I'd like you please just to kind of introduce yourself and your organization, and perhaps start talking about some of the challenges that farming communities are facing in the areas that you're working.
Yeah. So good evening from India, and good to see Hendrik after a long time. And so my name is KK Trivedi, and I work with an organization called Action for Social Advancement. Am I audible, sir? My voice is clear, sir?
Yes, very clear. Thank you, KK.
And which stands for Action for Social Advancement. We have been into this sector for about 3 decades, and we are based in central part of the India, and we are primarily a farm-centric organization working with the farming community in central eastern part of the India, and we work on a natural resource management approaches to benefit the smallholder community in smallholder community in India is basically the farmers who owns less than 2 hectares of the land. The marginal ones are the less than 1 hectare of land, and the small ones are less than 2 hectares of the land. So that's a definition as per the Indian context, right? So large part of our area is like we are. I think Hendrik has given a good brief about the model of the RPLC. So the model is same for this country as well, and we have been working with RPLC for since 2022, right? It has been about 3 years, right? And the context is different, say, right? So in our context, it's largely a tribal community, that too in an area which is very undulating with a lot of ridges and valley, right? And where we have challenges like the soil depth is low, the soil erosion is very high. It's a semi-arid area. It's a rainfall is about 400 to 500 millimeters only, say, right? And it is a single crop area. We do a single, largely the farmers are into the single cropping, and major crop is the cotton, say, here in this area also, right? Where we are working under RPLC model. So we broadly, the challenges can be classified into the three categories, right? So the first category, as I mentioned, this is a topography is very difficult. So there is a challenge of resource poverty, I would say, right? When I say resource poverty, so the two important resources for the farming community is land and water, sir, right? These are the two critical and important resource for the community, which is degraded, which is insufficient, right? So that's the resource poverty challenge we have for the farming community. The second, the critical challenge is about I would say, the human poverty, say, right? When I say human poverty with respect to the farming community, it means they don't have the required skill to do agriculture in a sustainable manner, right? With the given context of the topography, that is the one thing. Literacy is a issue, right? And uh, the required skill to practice a occupation in a sustainable manner is a challenge for that community. So in terms of skills, so that's a human poverty angle of this area for this particular target community. And third challenge for this community is, I would say, it is area poverty. When I say area poverty, so there are challenges in terms of infrastructure. So the banking infrastructure is poor, market infrastructure is poor. The market is distorted, say. So the fair system is not working, wherein they can fetch good or fair prices for their produce, whatever they are producing. Right? So these are the major the challenges, I would say, with the farming community, say, right? And this is what exactly we are trying to address through RPLC model, RPLC approach, which Hendrik has narrated just now, right? So how are we addressing it is a I will tell you briefly, and connecting the problems and solutions here, right? So like we are working with philanthropic money, CSR money as part of this. The collaboration and partnership is a very important component of this model. So we are trying to bring in a lot of stakeholders, be it from the businesses, be it from the government, from civil society, accessing CSR fund from the companies, right? Even trying to bring in the private players to strengthen the market systems, right? So, with the leveraging resources from philanthropic grants, which organizations like LODES and Inditex and other organizations in India are providing to provide a critical support to facilitate this process of resource mobilization. So very important component of this initiative is the government funds and government monies, right? So we do form a schematic linkages uh, to enrich the and upgrade the existing resources, working on land and waters. And when we say regenerative farming, so water is something which is very critical for the regenerative farming, because when you have a water, then only you can go for double crop, triple crop, or multi-cropping thing. If you don't have a water, you cannot think of any kind of crop, any kind of biomass, right? So working on water is very important. And we work on a geohydrological model, and in a landscape, we identify the natural depression, rivers, river basin, sub-basin, and make a very macro and micro level planning is done, where the structure is required, what kind of treatment is required, where the plantation is required, where we can have earthen structure, where we can have a masonry structure. So that kind of planning is done and prepared and submitted to the government, and leveraging it done through a government scheme to address the challenges of the resource poverty in terms of land and water restoration. Say that's a one way of addressing this problem on a very large scale in a landscape. The second way of the second important is your human poverty angles. We do a lot of capacity building on sustainable technology related to agriculture, so that one way is to do a in situ kind of value addition, say, right? And the Henrik talked about the emission and other thing. In agriculture, the major emission for a smallholder is because of application of chemical fertilizer, because of agriculture practices, say, be it the nitrous oxide or maybe the other fertilizers, say, that is a major contributor for the emissions, say, right? So can we do a in situ kind of value addition by promoting biofertilizers, by organic composting, and natural way of composting, and natural way of pesticide and other things, say. So that's where they save money, a lot of money rather than putting money by buying the material from the market. So that's the one thing, right? And then skilling them about the multi-cropping and how to do a integrated pest management by border cropping, trap cropping, those kind of things, right? And promoting agroforestry to create a kind of a very natural ecosystem at the farm level and within the close vicinity of the farming systems, right? That's the one way. So this is how we work on the skill development to promote the sustainable farming. And the way the Henrik has suggested, it's largely regenerative farming with organic certified farmers, say, organic certified farms, right? And another important thing we are doing with the farming community is to access the market, is that the partnership is the one aspect, like we are trying to bring market players like brands to have a farmer's commitment agreement for purchase of the produce. That's one thing. But at the same time, you understand that in the businesses, there are two critical things. When you negotiate with the market, you work with the large players like big corporates who are working with the European or American market. So the volume is the critical thing. Yeah, can we ensure a sustainable volume, say? And other thing is about the can you supply the material on time, say? Because there's a whole value chain, and it has to go step by step, and everything is linked to the backward sides, right? So for that, we have promoted large number of farmers cooperative. We call them farmer producer organization in this country. These are the organization the owned and managed by the farming community only, right? So we use this collective as a lever for, I would say, to achieve economy of scale, because individually these farmers with a meager land holding of 1.5 acre on an average, they are nothing. They cannot access the market. They cannot negotiate with the market. But 1,000 farming coming together, the volume becomes huge, which makes you say in a position to negotiate with the market and to ensure the supply to the market also. Then only they are going to value it. So collectives are promoted. They are trained on market aligned requirement, I would say, in terms of quality, in terms of logistic operations, right? In terms of accounting management, financial management, to ensure that this value chain works seamlessly from producer to the first level of processing, sir, right? And from then further onwards, say. So there is a lot of work involved into it, and we have been doing it for about 3 years. And in a nutshell, I can say that when we started this work, we were selling about we started something with 100 MT in the very first year. Now the volume 100 MT of lint in the very first year. The volume has gone up to about 8,000 MT in the current year, say, directly benefiting about close to say 50,000 farmers, smallholders particularly, say. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's impressive numbers for just 3 years. Definitely. And I'd like to ask you both a bit more about the compact, because I know you both have a compact. Hendrik already explained a little bit in Tanzania. But my understanding is that brings, the relevant government officials, whether they're from state level or district level. It brings private sector. It brings implementing organizations such as yours, KK, into regular meetings and potentially kind of new types of relationships that perhaps didn't exist before. Would you agree that's true? And what has been the benefit of that? So perhaps I can start with you, Hendrik, just bring you back for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, these stakeholders all meet otherwise as well. They all have relationships, but they might not talk about these issues in the way they do when they all come together. So the private sector, in our case, they require buying licenses from district authorities, so it's a very critical kind of relationship of governance and of making business. But I think the moment they sit together in a room with representatives from local communities, with civil society organizations, and in this landscape, no one can dispute the issues that are there. Yeah, in Swahili, there is no word for climate change, but everyone down to the village knows what climate change is, and they know that certain birds are not there anymore. So everyone is clear and knows what the issues are, and I think then it just requires a bit of facilitation to show that actually all these stakeholders have a common interest. And KK mentioned government funding in India is very critical there. In our landscape, government funding is actually quite a challenge. There's extremely limited resources, especially at district level. And then you can imagine you get into a conflict where sometimes I would even tell someone in the district, look, you're in a conflict of spending on health and education versus environment. And it's quite difficult to say you should spend on environment, but I think the moment you can show that there is a business case, the moment you create more kind of a better functioning economy around that, that moment you improve livelihoods of people and you increase tax income for the district. So I think it's more about facilitating that kind of discussion and understanding each other's perspectives. The businesses we are working with by now are the largest employers in those districts, by far the biggest taxpayers. So they are important as well. And I think everyone then understands, well, they have a right to do what they do. We need to support and facilitate them, while also these businesses, apart from just buying crops, are really engaged in, for example, tree planting initiatives, because they also realize we need biodiversity in order to still have crops to aggregate in, let's say, 10 years. So I think that's the main of facilitating that discussion around the table.
And KK, do you recognize the same dynamics in India, in Madhya Pradesh? And what has been the sort of practical impact of having this compact in the terms of your activities and the support you can offer farmers?
Yeah, for Indian government, for the government departments and ministries, this is also an important thing. So, in terms of compact, I would say we see a very good understanding at different levels, be it the district level or sub-district level or state level, right? And very recognition of this fact is that very recently government of Madhya Pradesh in India has come out with a very specific plan on the lines of the RPLC, right, and they have allocated about 40,000 hectares of landscape for this kind of approaches recently, right. And government of India has also come out with a mission on natural farming, because they also feel it is important initiative, and There are other factors also, like we do a lot of spending on the fertilizer subsidies, right? Which is a big cost on government exchequer, and they certainly want to have some control on it. Say. So from the government side, certainly it is being taken very positively, and there is a push from the government side also to promote such initiatives. That's one thing. From the farmers' perspective, I would say they are also facing challenges, like these are the poor farmers, and with such land holding of such a tiny land holding of 1.5 acres and 2 acres on average, with large number of farming community in this country, you will be find it worthy to notice that about 80% of our farming community is actually into this category of smallholders, right? And more than 60% out of that will be a marginal farmers, right? So they have this challenges of meeting the input cost on a regular basis. They fall in the trap of the debt trap, and then for them it is a vicious cycle, right? So this option of organic farming and natural farming and regenerative farming is certainly a good viable option in a long run. But what I feel is that uh, to make this viable, investment is certainly required because it has its own transition period, right? And somebody will have to take the cost of the transitions, right? And I also would like to say that uh, at least in this country, and I believe in other parts of the world also, nothing has changed or had changed without some additional investments, right? So investment are critical, be it when it was a green revolution in this country, and we all some 50 years before we followed this green revolution, and we chemical farming, which was not there in this country. There was huge investment made on the canal irrigation system. Huge subsidies were made for the fertilizers and pesticide. So without that, this green revolution would not have happened, and conventional farming or chemical farming would not have gained that much momentum. Say, now you want to change. Now you want to change it to natural and regenerative farming. This change will certainly require investment, right? So to make this happen, say, right? So 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 the support from the organization, philanthropic organization, market, and the government is very critical, because it is not just about a change in practice of the farming community. It is about the change in the behavior of the farming community, which had been induced and acquired over a period of time, say. So this is what is the situation, I would say, from the farmer's perspective, sir.
Thank you very much. So thank you both for explaining this complex model to us, and also for bringing it to life in the sense of the real issues that farmers are facing and how it's playing out. And I think a point you both made strongly there is that this is this kind of transformation takes a long time. I think you mentioned 20 years, Hendrik, and the fact that kind of new kinds of investors are needed, and this needs kind of long-term support in various different ways. So thank you both. I'd now like to introduce my next speaker, Subhadeep Sahaf from an organization that we are keen to know more about, Sattva Consulting. So Subhadeep, it'd be great if you could briefly introduce your work and talk about some of the issues in the Indian national context to show us that this kind of approach isn't unique, but also to explain some of the challenges that you found, and particularly this whole topic we've just been touching on of finding these kind of different kinds of investors, and your insights into that. So over to you, Sudeep.
Super. Thanks a lot, Tom, and thanks, Hendrik and Kiki, for sort of setting the stage up for us to sort of really summarize some of the key takeaways that really also emerged out of your discussion. So before I get started, I'll quickly introduce Sattva and myself as well. So I'm Subhadeep, and I work with this organization called Satwa Consulting. We are one of India's largest and biggest sort of social impact consulting firms, and we work with stakeholders across the impact spectrum, across various kinds of assignments, starting from strategy consulting to collaborative orchestration, and again across sectors. While most of our team members are based in India, we also are present in Southeast Asia as well as Europe. And I'll just maybe also bring up a quick presentation that we have put together while I walk you through some of the insights that have emerged from our study. Just allow me a second. Super. I hope my screen is visible.
It's loading.
All
It's
right.
nearly there. I think there we are. If you have your first slide.
Super. All right. I think before we get started on some of the insights on just the larger multi-stakeholder partnership ecosystem, so partnerships similar to the RTLC, I'll sort of give a brief overview of what the sector, the larger philanthropic ecosystem and the multi-stakeholder partnership ecosystem has looked like in the recent years. So as you can see, there has been a consistent growth in the larger philanthropic ecosystem by about 13% over the last 5 years, and this is largely driven by domestic funders, right? And when I'm saying domestic funders, that's largely the UHNIs and the HNIs. Similarly, when it comes to multi-stakeholder partnerships as well, there has been both a growth in terms of the absolute numbers. As you can see on the graph on the right-hand side, there's been a significant sort of peak around COVID, and while a lot of a lot of these multi-stakeholder partnership initiatives were launched during COVID to address the immediate crisis that the pandemic posed. I think there has been a consistent momentum in also setting up initiatives to address some of the some long-term problem statements similar to the initiative we just spoke about, and the momentum has only increased, right? And the graph on the left-hand side also tells you about just the influx in capital that has been invested in multi-stakeholder partnerships. So that basically tells us that there is both a momentum in terms of money that's available for these partnerships, and number two, there are a lot of initiatives that funders and other implementation partners are sort of orchestrating within the ecosystem. Having said that, I'll sort of come to some of the key takeaways from the study that Satwa has conducted with support from Wings on the multi-stakeholder partnership ecosystem. Maybe I'll just take a couple of seconds to just walk you through the slide. So this is the framework that we've used to really understand the multi-stakeholder partnerships, and we have looked at them across two aspects, right? So number one is the focus outcome. So whether it is influencing stakeholders, creating public goods, and then sort of taking all of that to strengthening practice. And the other aspect is the openness in their design and flexibility to onboarding new members, right? And maybe I'll just take the example of RTLC, for instance. Given RTLC is a model that has been established in India, and it heavily sort of relies on really increasing the incomes of smallholder agricultural farmers by strengthening their practices and addressing the challenges within the existing practices that are there in the agricultural systems. It sort of falls in the bucket of program, given it also across countries, across the 4 countries where it's currently operational. It also works with a definite set of partners, right? So that's largely the framework. Maybe I'll pause for a second in case any of you have any questions before I move on.
I think Subhadeep, move on. We are challenged by time as ever in these sessions, so
sure.
yes, just continue.
Super. Okay. So what we found out is that MSPs in India, they form a bunch of these structures, right? And we can see that there are 2 big circles. So number one is network and alliances. We see a majority, the 24 out of the 58 multi-stakeholder partnerships that we have studied are networks or alliances, which essentially means that these are organizations that have come together and they have committed to learning and sharing resources with each other, aligned to a common goal or a common cause or problem statement. They do not necessarily pool funds or implement programs or anything of that sort. So we really see that there's a lot of momentum around that particular bucket. And on the other hand, we also see that there are a lot of initiatives, a lot of programs that really pool funds and work towards implementing projects on the ground. And again, the idea is for this to really be able to strengthen practice, right? And RPLC itself is an example of that. And I think just also building on that, right? So there's momentum in terms of philanthropic capital, there's growth in MSPs, and all of these really also points us to the very takeaway that I will sort of share here, is that most of these initiatives are multi-sectoral, right? And maybe and that's also itself has been one of our learnings, the fact that a lot of these complex systemic problems really need partners and collaborative members to really address them in a 360-degree approach. And I'll take the example of one of the collectives that we sort of enable, which is the Samohika Shakti, which works towards alleviating poverty in terms of waste picker families in Bangalore, which is one of India's top 3-4 biggest cities. And it works across a bunch of cross-cutting areas, right? So number one, it works towards ensuring that the family members of waste pickers have the right skills and they receive the right education, access to healthcare, sanitation, etc. Number two, it ensures that the sort of solid waste that's generated within the city, that does not get sent to the landfills, right? And as a part of that, over the last 2 years work of the collective, they have saved close to 2 lakh tons of solid waste from being deposited into landfills, and then sort of reducing the impact that would have on climate. And number three, it also works with citizen groups across Bangalore, which is a city in the country, like I mentioned, towards just changing attitudes towards informal waste pickers, and and altogether the idea is for all of these different pillars to help alleviate the sort of the conditions in which waste pickers operate within the country. And I think if we sort of really were to summarize some of the things that are coming out as of right now, and also sort of building on some of the things that the speakers before me have already mentioned, is just the fact that addressing some of these very, very complex problems across geographies, right? And while this is emerging from our study in India, it's also applicable to the insights that we've learned from work across different similar geographies, is just the fact that the approaches need to be multi-sectoral, the approaches need to have several stakeholders across government, civil society, and philanthropy, and it needs to be long-term for it to be successful. Before I close out, one final sort of takeaway that I wanted to share with the group is just the fact that while we see that a lot of these initiatives have been able to create impact, most of these are anchored by global foundations, and that sort of really is interesting for us to note the fact that, especially in the context of India, where there has been a growth in domestic philanthropy as well, we do not see as much involvement from the domestic philanthropic market, given different sort of expectations that either corporates have, or just the nascency of the UHNI and the HNI ecosystem. I think, I think we'll just need to sort of wait for a couple of more years to see how the involvement of the domestic philanthropic actors shape up in the multi-stakeholder partnership context, especially. Yeah. Over to you, Dom. Any questions? Anything else you think we should mention at this point?
Well, just to thank you very much, Subhadeep. Again, it would be lovely to spend more time delving deeper into your findings, but I think you've made a great contribution there in terms of establishing that this is now becoming a widespread approach in India, which is exciting. It's addressing systemic issues in many different sectors. But I think your last point is also an important one, which chimes with what we heard from the RS from the other speakers. that kind of finding those resources, particularly local resources for longer term investments and financing of various kinds, is indeed a big challenge for us all. In the few minutes remaining, I want to hand back now to Darian and Eva to put that into a global context, and to say a few final words before we close. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I'll just go, sorry, if I'll just go quickly because I have to rush to another thing in just a moment. But I've just been absolutely fascinated by what we've heard so far. Such a great example in with the RPLC of a PPP. It has all the great elements of it, of a PPP that really works. You know, it has all of the key parties, the key partners there, both who clearly are benefiting from the collaboration, but are also bring critical resources. And for example, the government, it's currently subsidizing, it's subsidizing fertilizer. It's incredibly expensive. It needs to reduce the amount of fertilizer. Therefore, of course, it's going to invest its time and its money into the RPLC, and of course, it's critical for things like water distribution, etc. It's just playing one key part in this overall partnership. Then just some of the other success factors we heard about in Tanzania, about having worked for about 6 years in the area, building up the trust, getting to know the farmers, the farmer organizations, the commercial purchasers, the market, etc. That being able to build up that trust over time is hugely important then to take forward this type of collaboration. Then something around some of the things that put in place, having the clear KPIs, collectively developing those KPIs, and then having the M&E to really sort of be able to follow those, to then be able to collectively create this common vision that everyone is working towards, I think is hugely important too. And then there's something here also, it really demonstrates why philanthropy is so important. I wrote down a quote that said, "Someone has to pay for the cost of transition." And that's true. And there are two types of funding or financing here. It seems that there is the philanthropy comes in to really sort of be able to show proof of concept, demonstrate how everybody can benefit from this approach, how it can actually deliver a commercially viable approach, which therefore is scalable, and therefore can attract the second kind of funding, which are the investors, whether they're company or private investors, or even investments from development banks, because this program has demonstrated, or is demonstrating, that it is able to really deliver that return. Enables external funding. So just in terms of from the global perspective, we need to see more of these. We need to see foundations working in this way, putting in the time, understanding that the system transformations do take considerable period of time, therefore putting funding over longer periods. Focusing on investing in the development of these partnerships, the building of the trust, the bringing everyone around the table. That's another critical role that philanthropy will play. And then also reaching out to other investors who will invest on different terms. All of these things are absolutely critical if we are going to deliver the sufficient momentum and injections and impetus that can genuinely change these sorts of systems at scale. Thank you. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Darian. I'll try not to repeat too much of that, and I want to thank the speakers for really illustrating what we mean with these types of partnerships. So for me, there's 3 big reflections here, specifically around the role of philanthropy. And I think the examples have really shown that there's a need for a systems approach in philanthropy in this complex, interconnected world where we have these deeply interconnected challenges that we're not currently addressing as philanthropy in these interconnected ways. So there's the scale of the problems, like the examples have shown, that really need the scaled responses. But right now, philanthropy often still acts in a silo. And philanthropy alone cannot solve these, business alone cannot solve these, and governments alone cannot solve these problems, especially now with the shrinking international aid budgets that we're looking at. So that really, for me, these types of partnerships are really powerful to achieve the system transformation, and the examples show that. So the question for philanthropy is, how do you break out of the silo? And I think we see that there are many different ways in which that can happen, and the SACRA research also pointed to that. So the second reflection for me is also based on what Darian just said, each partner plays their specific roles, plays to their specific strengths. I think what we are seeing across the research we've commissioned is that it needs sort of two ingredients. So if we say, okay, philanthropy has this particular role, taking risks, seed investment, bridge building to communities, I think it really depends also on what we mean by philanthropy. Who are we talking about? Is it venture philanthropy? Is it corporate philanthropy, local philanthropy, right? These are very different. So we need to dive deeper into the different roles there. But we're seeing that governments models are really important and having them really clear. So what is the role of each partner, including philanthropy? What are the different finance mechanisms that exist? And I think I heard that from the presenters as well. Having that really clear is an ingredient for success. And then the second really big one that maybe we didn't hear enough here and can dive deeper into follow-up conversation is certainly having an enabling environment, by which I mean a regulatory environment for these types of partnerships. So how do we ensure that there's, from the government perspective, good regulation for philanthropy to engage, for example, to be able to sub-grant or have incentives to engage? So what I would say finally is that, these kinds of case studies are really critical for us to show the impact that these kinds of partnerships have and can have, and then to show how foundations can more effectively operate by engaging, especially domestic philanthropy. And I think that's a very key finding that we're seeing, that right now it's driven by a few international actors. How do we grow that ecosystem, in this case, that ecosystem of philanthropy? And that's really where Wings comes in. And as part of our philanthropy transformation initiative, we're working with the philanthropic sector to engage more in these. So I look forward to many more conversations and sharing these regional studies that are coming up. And I hope we get to come back together in this constellation and continue to share. So yes, thanks again to the speakers, the partnering initiative, and back to you, Tom.
Yes, so I echo those thanks to our three speakers for contributing, and for me also, I've noticed the wonderful thing about these complex type interventions, difficult as they are, is that they really have real impact on so many different themes, which are so important. And just sort of glancing at the SDGs, which are going to be reviewed at the HLPF this year, we have Goal 3, good health and well-being, Goal 5, gender equality, Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal 17, partnership for the goals. And in addition, we have Goal 14, life below water. So apart really from Goal 14, I think RPLC and many of these multi-stakeholder partnerships working at system level are actually addressing all of those SDGs as they need to, because that are the challenges that people in all these communities are themselves facing, and the challenges that the environment also faces as a result of these various pressures. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for attending. Hope you found it interesting, and we'd certainly love to continue to engage with you on these topics as we move forward. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you.